In his latest Substack piece, Richard Hanania questions why, in a democracy divided pretty equally between two parties, most institutions that are not explicitly conservative seem to lean left or liberal. He concludes that, quote, if one side simply cares more, in this case liberals, it's going to exert a disproportionate influence on all institutions and be more likely to see its preference enacted.
Joining us now to discuss, President and founder of the Center for Study of Partisanship and Ideology and research fellow at Defense Priorities, Richard Hanania, friend of the show. It's good to see you, Richard. I mean, you made quite a bit of this really went viral in a lot of circles. People criticized in some way, and we'll get to that. But what is your basic argument that you're laying out here? Because it does seem like you grew up in the 90s and like corporations are corporations and like they kind of have their thing, but then something clicked and you have a new post about this around like 2016 or whatever, and now everything just seems explicitly liberal. Like, what happened?
Yeah, I mean, famously, when we were growing up, we knew that Michael Jordan once said Republicans buy sneakers too. As far as the question is why he didn't he didn't comment on a political campaign. And when you were growing up, there was when you bought your soda or your potato chips from a company, they often didn't lecture you on it. So something really changed, I think, in the last 5 or 6 years. And this post started as an investigation to try to find out what that was. And so this is the topic of woke capital. It's something that a lot of politicians are talking about. J.D. Vance, Josh Hawley. I mean, a lot of people are talking about this like it's a new thing, and it is to a certain extent a new thing, and something has changed. But I think there's a broader point, and this is what I argue in the piece, which is that all institutions are liberal. So the Harvard is liberal, the colleges are liberal, the media is liberal, the mainline churches. So there's a broader mystery here. The real question is why business held out for so long. Why was business sort of the last domino to fall? And I do get to that in no follow-up piece. But the question of why institutions are liberal basically comes down to the fact that liberals care more about politics. So in our presidential elections, as Crystal said, it's pretty evenly divided. Biden won 51-47 in the popular vote, so he had a 4-point victory. It's never, and that's pretty large, actually. It's usually, a bit closer than that, or Republicans have occasionally gotten more votes in midterm elections than they did, not in a while in the presidential election, but, they're at least always competitive. So you would think, institutions might be 50-50 or close to 50-50, or maybe try to stay neutral. But, the world doesn't work like that. Elections work like that, where everyone's vote counts equally. So if half the people are liberal, half the people are conservatives, the Democrats and Republicans have a equal chance of getting into power. Everything else in life, though, it matters how much you care about something. So very few people actually try to change institutions. Very few people, begin activist campaigns. Very few people go out to the streets and protest. Very few people try to cancel other people on Twitter. And basically, the demographic that's engaging in more activism is the one that's going to be able to influence institutions in its favor. And there's a lot of evidence that that's liberals. What is that evidence? So first of all, liberals donate more money to political campaigns. That's been true since 2016, wasn't always universally true, but there's a lot more people donating to Democrats than Republicans in federal elections, something like 61-39% if you just look at the universe of donors in the 2020 campaign, Trump versus Biden. And then you look at something like protesting. We have data on who protests, but just from what we know about the world, you don't need to look at the data. I mean, the Women's March drew more than 1 million people by a lot of estimates. There's nothing comparable on the right. There hasn't been any really right-wing mass protests in at least a decade, and that was the Tea Party, and even that didn't match BLM and the Women's March. And then you look at things like how, are you likely to break off a friendship or not date someone over politics? Now, a lot of people say, well, that's an intolerant thing to do, but it's an indication of how much you care about politics. And liberals and Democrats tend to be more likely to say they wouldn't be friends with someone of who voted differently, or they wouldn't want their child to marry somebody who voted differently, et cetera. You also have data on petitions. And then you have even the I think probably most important is who goes into careers where you don't make as much money as you could for a similar level of education, but you have a disproportionate influence on policy. So liberals, as we all know, are more likely to go into academia and journalism. So what happens is when you take all these pieces of evidence together, you basically have a picture of the world where the country is pretty divided, but one side just cares a lot more, and that side's going to control pretty much every institution.
So a couple of questions here. First of all, some of your pieces of evidence seem to indicate that liberals have always cared more. Like, I think in particular about protesting, it seems like liberals have always been, people on the left have always been more likely to protest than people on the right. So why is it just now that more intense political engagement is translating into corporate preferences in particular? And number two, is this just an expression of the fact that so many college-educated Americans are moving into the Democratic Party and have this cultural liberal ideology, and that's just being expressed because those are, if you're college-educated, you're much more likely to end up in the elite class, and so that's really what's going on here. What do you think of those theories?
Yeah, those are great questions, Crystal, and they're such great questions. I wrote up a follow-up piece that dealt directly with those issues, so I could take that on. What's changed recently is their mobilization gap basically expanded a lot in 2016. So in 2012, we have a question: have you protested in the last 4 years? There were about 50% more liberals who had protested in the last 4 years in 2012. Also in 2012, conservatives and liberals had signed about an equal number of petitions. You look at how many liberals or how many conservatives had signed a petition in the last 4 years, it was about equal. By the time 2016 comes along and the question is asked after the 2016 election, liberals become something like 9 or 10 times more likely there are more 9 or 10 liberals are protesting for every one conservative, and that tapers off by 2020, but it's still like 4 to 1. So it's huge. It's big, much bigger than it was 2012 at the height of the Tea Party. The left passes the right in petitions too. Now they're citing 60 to 70% more petitions. If you look at the donor game, basically I have this nice graph in the follow-up piece where you look at how much money was given to every federal candidate. So House candidates, Senate candidates, presidential candidates from 1990 to 2020, and the line is pretty much even from 1990 till 2016, except 28 when Obama massively outraised McCain. But in 2016, the Democrats take the lead. They keep it in 2018, and then they keep it 2020 actually increasing their lead. So the way I put it is woke capital was the last domino to fall. Different institutions, different institutions are different how much they respond to the public. So, Coca-Cola or Walmart, the way I put it, cares more about what the median voter thinks than, say, does Harvard or the ACLU. And so about 2016, 2017, you see the Walmarts and the Coca-Colas of the world, probably Walmart less so, Coca-Cola more so, start to take political positions. And I think that what happened was in 2016, the mobilization gap just exploded. As far as your second question, whether this is explained by changes in educational polarization, I think, that's complementary to this. So people who are college educated tend to care more about politics, and college-educated whites in particular moved towards the Democrats away from the Republicans since 2012 and 2016 up until now. It's still not an overwhelming, massive victory. I mean, college-educated whites are something like 55 or 60% vote Democrat instead of Republican. That's just Trump. I think that probably Republicans do better down ballot with college-educated whites. So it is important, given that that's probably the most mobilized demographic in the country. It just doesn't seem as overwhelming, as enough to explain it all. I think the 10 to 1 protest gap is more important than a 10-15 point lead among college-educated whites. But they both work together. I mean, they're complementary explanations.
Interesting.
And so, Richard, a lot of right-wingers made of your post. They're like, well, we need to care more, or the only way that you can push back on that is the government. You pointed out that there's some problems with that, given how they feel about the government and more. What would your response to those people be about, if you want to do something about it, what can you do about it?
You guys ask such good questions. That's foreshadowing the next piece. Robbie Swove at Reason had an article writing up my piece, and he's a libertarian, and he liked it because he tried to say, well, fighting woke capital using government is sort of hopeless. I have some thoughts on that. I think that, I will say that it puts you in a difficult situation. There's not an easy solution. It's not simply, we need to use government, because when you use government, the people who go into government, the regulators of the federal bureaucracy that never gets fired and is always there, the media that influences the regulators, they're all against you, right? And so you're moving power away from corporations who maybe were forced into taking a political position, who would rather stay out of it and just make money. At least, making money and being woke are sort of, countervailing pressures on them. activism. And then you're moving power more to a full-time activist class. That could be a problem. At the same time, doing nothing and letting things go as they are is also a problem for the right. So there isn't an easy solution here. And I hope to explore it more and sort of lay out what some realistic options could be.
I'm excited to read it, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Really interesting piece. And I would just say from my perspective, because by and large, I am culturally liberal, like woke capital is an issue for me as well, because I think oftentimes it gets used as like a Trojan horse for deeply regressive economic policies. So really fascinating, Richard. Great to have you.
Thanks, Richard. Appreciate it, man.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Thanks.
See you later.
More Rising for you after this.